While this podcast isn't rated explicit, the content may not be suitable for younger listeners. Welcome to Sex for Saints, the Christian couple's guide to great sex. I'm your host, certified sex and marriage coach, Amanda Lauder. This is episode 343, Sexual Shame. Welcome to Sex for Saints, a podcast for Christian couples. My goal with this podcast is to help enlighten, educate, and inspire you to understand yourself, your spouse, and your sexuality better. I talk about sex in a way you probably haven't heard before. I'm bold, I'm direct, but I keep everything in line with my strong Christian values. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. So I want to start this episode by addressing a topic that I think a lot of people struggle with, but we don't talk about as often, and that's sexual shame. And shame around sexuality is a burden that many of us carry, and it can significantly impact not only how we view ourselves, but how we connect with our spouse. So if you've ever found yourself feeling like something is wrong with you for having sexual thoughts, or you've hidden certain aspects of your sexuality out of fear or guilt, or maybe you just think that sex just needs to be completely private, this episode is for you. So first, let's talk about why we have sexual shame. It's really rooted in cultural, religious, and societal messaging that tells us that our sexuality is something to be feared, to be controlled, or even hidden. It's learned. This is not something that we were born with. And these messages are often internalized very, very early in life, and then just reinforced over time, creating a very deep-seated belief that there's something inherently wrong with our sexual natures. So tell me if you've ever heard any of these ideas. Good girls don't talk about sex, or boys only want one thing, or genitals are gross, or we need to be modest to help boys control their thoughts, or we need to be careful with our sexuality so we don't harm someone. Or sex is the sin next to murder. Or we must protect our virtue to be worthy of God's love. These seemingly innocent phrases plant seeds of shame, suggesting that sex is something dangerous or morally wrong. And over time, these beliefs can lead to confusion and guilt when we start to feel natural sexual urges or desires. And they result in an internal conflict. On one hand, we feel curious and attracted to others. And on the other hand, we've been told that those feelings are inappropriate or sinful. Religious teachings can also play a very significant role. Many faith traditions emphasize sexual purity, which can create the idea that sex is only acceptable under very specific conditions, typically within marriage, and even then with limitations. Now, I'm not saying that the law of chastity isn't valid and correct and an eternal truth. That's not what I'm saying. But when we frame it in a way that God can't love us unless we obey, then that's problematic. Because if then someone deviates from these rules, makes very normal, even I would say age-appropriate decisions that are against God law, they might experience overwhelming guilt and feel like they've lost their worthiness or spiritual standing and that they can't come back from it. I've seen this happen with many women who engaged in some sort of, sexual activity before they were married, and they carry that shame into the relationship, even if they repented, right? But they carry it into the relationship, believing that they are ruined or unworthy of a good marriage and a healthy sexual relationship. And that mindset often prevents her from fully enjoying sex with her spouse or even from discussing her sexual desires openly. In a Facebook group that I was in, I recently saw a post from a woman who admitted to engaging in sexual activity, not penetration, but she said just about everything else, before she and her husband were married in the temple. And they didn't repent, and they got married anyway. And this guilt has stuck with them for so many years that it has completely destroyed their relationship, and destroyed how they feel about themselves. They don't know if their marriage is even valid or if they are worthy. And it makes me so sad to see how much this shame that she and her husband are carrying around that could have been avoided if we had talked about sex differently. And if the atonement and repentance was more of that conversation. So how does sexual shame show up? Well, it does not look the same for everyone. And I would even say that a lot of people don't think that they have sexual shame when they actually do, because it doesn't necessarily manifest in the ways that they think it will. So let's talk about a few of these ways. The first is something is wrong with me because of my sexual thoughts and feelings. Now, this is a very classic example of internalized shame. Someone might feel guilty just for experiencing sexual desire. They might think, if I'm thinking about sex, does that make me a bad person? Am I perverted for feeling this way? And this type of thinking can make it difficult to enjoy sexual experiences without guilt or anxiety. So I see this particularly a lot with men, that they have a lot of sexual thoughts and feelings, sexual fantasies. And because maybe they're more on the higher end in their relationship with these things, they think that there must be something wrong with them because of it. And so oftentimes they try to suppress their desires and even kind of avoid intimacy with their spouse out of fear that all of these thoughts and feelings make them impure or even deviant. The second is something is wrong with my body. So body shame is another layer of sexual shame. If we're taught that certain body parts are private or gross or shameful, it can be really hard to feel confident during sex. So that negative body image also plays into this. Believing we're not attractive enough can lead us to feeling undeserving of sexual pleasure, or that our spouse doesn't actually love us because why would they if our body isn't perfect? So, for example, a woman might feel really insecure about her post-pregnancy body, thinking that she's no longer attractive to her husband. And this insecurity leads her to avoid sexual intimacy, covering her body during sex, or refusing to let her partner see her fully. Number 3 is my sexuality should be kept hidden. Now, many people feel like they need to hide their sexual desires, believing that openly expressing or even acknowledging them is wrong. And they might avoid discussing sex with their spouse. They might never initiate, or they feel shame for wanting sex more than they believe they should. So a husband might avoid initiating with his wife because he fears as being labeled too sexual or needy, assuming that his desire for frequent intimacy is abnormal. The fourth is God will not love me or bless me if I am sexual or if I enjoy my sexuality. So this belief can create a significant emotional and spiritual burden. The idea that God disapproves of sexual enjoyment can cause deep conflict for someone who wants to honor their faith while also enjoying sexual pleasure. So a woman might feel conflicted about enjoying sex with her husband, fearing that her desire for sex could somehow distance her from God. This can create her holding back emotionally and physically, even in a very committed, loving relationship. And number 5 is talking about sexuality is wrong and should be kept private. So when we're taught that talking about sex is taboo, it makes it difficult to seek help. It makes it difficult to express concerns or share desires, even with your spouse. So this lack of communication leads to misunderstandings and unmet expectations and desires within marriage. So a couple might avoid discussing their sexual wants and desires for years because they were both raised to believe that such conversations are inappropriate. And as a result, their sexual relationship becomes stagnant or dissatisfying, but they don't know how to fix it because they've never learned how to communicate openly about sex. Hey there. I have a fantastic Black Friday offer coming your way, and you're going to get the early scoop. From Monday, November 25th through Monday, December 2nd, you can join my Embrace You Elite Society membership for only $5 for your first month. That's $5 to dive into exclusive content, live coaching, and connect with a community of women just like you. After that, it's just $49 per month to keep going strong. And for engaged couples, my Engaged Couples course will be available for only $49, a one-time opportunity to lay a foundation for lifelong intimacy and connection. So mark your calendars because this Black Friday week special is too good to miss. So when we experience shame in regards to our sexuality, it disrupts the natural flow, creating barriers between our desires and our ability to express them. So if we feel shame around our sexual thoughts, we might suppress them, causing us to disconnect from our bodies. If we feel ashamed of our bodies, we might shy away from physical intimacy altogether. When shame is present, it becomes hard to relax and to be fully present during sex, which impacts both our pleasure and our connection with our partner. So if you are a woman who grew up being told that good girls don't enjoy sex, you might find yourself unable to fully engage during sex. You might feel like you're constantly holding back, worried that enjoying sex too much could make you bad in some way. And when it comes to our marriages, that sexual shame can drive a wedge between partners, really creating distance and tension. When we feel ashamed, we tend to shut down emotionally and physically. Instead of reaching out to our spouse for connection, we might withdraw to protect ourselves from the discomfort of vulnerability. Shame also hinders communication. If one partner is too ashamed to talk about their sexual needs, desires, or insecurities, the other partner might feel confused or rejected or even resentful. And over time, this lack of communication can lead to frustration, dissatisfaction, and a breakdown in intimacy and the sexual relationship. So maybe it's a husband who struggles with erectile dysfunction, and he might feel intense shame about his condition. So instead of discussing it with his wife and seeking solutions together, he just avoids sex altogether, leaving his wife feeling very unwanted and disconnected. And this creates a cycle of distance and resentment, all rooted in shame. Shame makes us hide, both from ourselves and from others. So I want to discuss a few ways that people hide from their sexuality. The first is minimizing desires. So we might convince ourselves that we don't really want sex or that our desires are not important. And this can lead to sexual avoidance or pretending we're fine with a lack of sex and intimacy. The second is just avoiding sex and intimacy altogether. So some people just shut down sexually, avoiding touch or affection for fear that it will lead to feelings of inadequacy or shame. And then the third is detaching emotionally. So in some cases, people go through the motions of sex, but remain emotionally disconnected, treating sex as a task rather than a source of pleasure or connection. Now, as I've gone through these, maybe you're recognizing some things in yourself, but I'm guessing more of you are starting to recognize these things in your spouse, because people who experience a lot of sexual shame probably don't listen to this podcast. Now, I could totally be wrong about that, but they're hiding so much from their sexuality that even listening to a podcast about sex feels wrong. And so your partner, if they are refusing to listen, if they are refusing to engage and talk about this, they're probably experiencing a lot of sexual shame. So Brené Brown, she's the queen about talking about shame, right? She also talks about shame shields. And I think this is really helpful in understanding how we as humans respond to shame. So there are 3 ways that we respond. We move away, we move toward, or we move against. So when we are moving away, we retreat and withdraw, which might look like avoiding sexual intimacy or emotionally shutting down. So a man might refuse to talk about his sexual insecurities, shutting down conversations about sex and intimacy entirely. And over time, this leads to a growing distance between him and his spouse. And it could be a woman too. I'm just using a man as an example for this one. The second is moving toward. So moving toward is we try to people please others to avoid shame. So in sexual relationships, this could mean having sex to keep your partner happy, even if you really don't want to or don't enjoy it. So a woman might engage in sex more often than she actually wants to because she feels pressure to please her husband rather than because she desires it. And this reinforces the idea that her needs don't matter and reinforces the shame that she's feeling. And the third is moving against. So we fight back against the shame by becoming defensive or critical. So in terms of sexuality, this can manifest as anger, blame, or avoidance when faced with sexual difficulties. So maybe it's a spouse who feels insecure about sexuality. And so when you try to engage in a conversation, they lash out, they maybe blame each other for lack of intimacy rather than confronting their own feelings of shame. Hey listeners, are you loving the tips and insights from Sex for Saints? Want to apply them to your own life? Join my Embrace You Elite Society membership. In this exclusive membership, you'll get access to personalized coaching, practical tools, and a supportive community of women all working towards enhancing their intimate lives. Ready to take your intimacy to the next level? Visit amandalauder.com and join today. Let's embrace a more fulfilling and intimate life together. Now back to the show. Okay, so now that we've talked about all the ways that shame could maybe show up, let's talk about the antidotes. Okay, the antidote to shame, according to Brené Brown, is vulnerability, connection, and self-compassion. So how do we actually practice this? Well, there's different modalities that offer tools for helping to heal sexual shame. And I highly recommend that you either come into coaching or go into therapy to work on these. So the first one is thought work or cognitive behavioral approaches. And these help you identify and challenge the beliefs that fuel your shame. So if you think, I'm bad for wanting sex, thought work can help you recognize that this is just a belief, not a fact, and to work through and replace it with healthier thoughts and beliefs, like it's okay for me to desire sex. And this is a lot of what we do in coaching. The second thing is somatic work. So somatic work focuses on reconnecting with the body. So sexual shame often causes us to disconnect from our physical selves. So practices like body awareness, breath work, and mindful touch can help us rebuild that connection. This is something I do with a lot of my clients and help them release the shame they feel in their bodies that keeps them from feeling pleasure and reaching orgasm. And this can be a very powerful process, and by feeling more present in their bodies, they can begin to let go of the shame that's stored there. The third is trauma therapy. So for those whose sexual shame is rooted in trauma, specialized therapies like EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, can help process and heal those traumatic memories. So trauma therapy allows individuals to release the emotional charge from past experiences and move toward a healthier, shame-free relationship with their sexuality. And this is something that cannot be done in coaching. It needs to be done through specifically therapy. And so often, if you know that you need that trauma therapy, I recommend that people go there first, and then they can come into coaching for the thought work and somatic work. If you don't think you have trauma therapy, coaching can work. But if I start seeing things that look like trauma, then I will refer you out. There are also some things that you can do alone that you don't need a coach or a therapist for. The first is recognizing where shame shows up for you, right? Is it in your thoughts, in your feelings, in your behaviors? Just starting to build some awareness around that is really important. The second is challenging those beliefs by seeking out new perspectives. So understand that your sexuality is a natural, healthy part of who you are. It's okay to feel desire, to enjoy sex, and to communicate your needs. The third is by practicing vulnerability with your spouse. So open up about your feelings around sex and shame. Talk about your fears, your desires, and your experiences. When you bring shame into the light, it loses its power. And number 4 is building self-compassion. By recognizing that you are worthy of love and connection just as you are. Brene Brown talks about embracing imperfection and being kind to ourselves. So start giving yourself the grace to make mistakes, to learn, and to grow into your sexual self. Now, when we free ourselves from shame, we open the door to deeper intimacy, both emotionally and physically. Without shame, you can be more honest and open with your spouse about your desires, your needs, your insecurities. This vulnerability fosters trust, which is the foundation of a healthy sexual relationship. So overcoming sexual shame also allows you to enjoy sex more fully. When you stop viewing sex as something shameful, you can embrace it as a source of pleasure, connection, and joy in your marriage. You'll feel more confident in expressing your desires and more open to exploring new experiences with your spouse. So I know a couple who has struggled with sexual shame for years. They have even done a lot of therapy around it. And, when they come into coaching, they're learning to talk more openly about their sexual needs and desires and insecurities for the first time. And you can just start to see them lose that sexual shame. They're just starting to let it go. And they experience a whole new level of closeness and trust and satisfaction in the relationship, which is really amazing. Sexual shame can be so overwhelming, but it's not something that you have to carry forever. So by practicing thought work, somatic work, or even if you need some trauma therapy, you can begin to release that sexual shame and embrace a healthier, more fulfilling sexual identity. And as you do, you'll not only experience personal healing, but also transform the intimacy in your marriage. All right, my friends, thank you so much for joining me today. Remember, love is a journey, not a destination. Stay committed, stay passionate, and stay connected. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Like what you're hearing on this podcast? Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Don't forget to leave me a review and share it with your friends.